At the real estate gala, my dad called me street garbage, in front of everyone. My uncle laughed and said, "No skills, no income." My mom looked away. They told security to kick me out. I said nothing. 2 weeks later, the board voted to replace him with me. His face. You had to see it. The words dropped like something heavy falling from a great height. Not an echo, not a shout. Just a statement delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who has never been questioned. Around us, the room still went in that particular way expensive rooms do when something unscripted happens. Champagne flutes paused halfway to lips. Conversations died mid-sentence. A server stopped walking. A man beside me pretended to check his phone, but his thumb never moved. I felt nothing stir inside me, no heat rising to my face, no tremor in my hands, just a clean awareness of every detail around me. The cut of my father's tuxedo, the familiar authority in his posture, the way he looked past me when he said it, as if I were something stuck to the bottom of his shoe rather than his daughter. My uncle's laugh came a beat too late, too loud. The sound of a man who knows exactly where he stands in the hierarchy and enjoys reminding everyone else of their place beneath him. My mother's eyes slid away, not to protect me, not to protest, just to avoid the discomfort of having to choose. I kept my hands folded at my waist. I did not step back. I did not step forward. I did not correct him or defend myself or ask him why. The gala was the kind of event where reputations were traded like currency. Black tie, white orchids, a ballroom filled with people who spoke in measured tones about square footage and future returns. Legacy families clustered together, their last names whispered with deference. Investors circulated with the relaxed confidence of people who never had to explain how they got there. Cameras waited for faces that mattered. If you were seen in this room, you were presumed to belong. If you were not, you did not exist. I was there because I had every right to be. 8% of my family's company belonged to me, shares my grandfather had left me before he died. Non-voting shares, but shares nonetheless. Enough to receive quarterly reports, enough to attend board meetings as an observer, enough to make my father uncomfortable every time he remembered he could not force me to sell. He had tried. 3 times in 6 years he had made offers, each time more aggressive than the last. Each time I had said no without explanation. The shares were not about money. They were about access, about information, about keeping one door open that he could not lock. He stood near the center of the room, exactly where he always positioned himself. The light found him easily. It always had. He spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed, to rooms rearranging themselves around his presence. When he turned and saw me, something flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe, or surprise that I had dared to show up at all. Then he smiled. Not kindly, decisively. "Why is she here?" His voice carried across the group around him, pitched to reach beyond them. "This is a professional event." No one answered. The silence stretched for a moment before my uncle filled it with that laugh. "Relax. She is harmless. No skills, no income." He said it like a punchline, inviting others to join in. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the group. My mother said nothing. She never did in rooms like this. What my father did not know, what none of them knew, was that I had spent the past 6 years building something they could not see. While they measured my worth by volume and visibility, I had been working at Pemberton Capital, a fund that managed $400 million and happened to be one of their primary banking partners. I had started as an analyst. I was now vice president of risk. My name appeared on reports that crossed their lawyers' desks. They just never bothered to read who had written them. Security arrived the way security always arrives at places like this. Quiet, polite, trained to make removal look like a courtesy rather than an eviction. A hand gestured toward the exit. A rehearsed apology for the inconvenience. I nodded. I smoothed the front of my dress. I thanked the host as if I were leaving early by choice. I did not look back at my father. I did not give my uncle the satisfaction of meeting his eyes. I did not wait for my mother to acknowledge me. The doors closed behind me with a soft, padded sound designed not to disturb the party continuing inside. The hallway was dimmer, carpeted mercifully quiet. The music faded to a distant hum. My breath came evenly. I stood there for a moment, waiting for something to break open inside me. Anger, grief, the familiar sting of humiliation I had felt so many times before. But what arrived instead was clarity, clean and steady and surprisingly calm. This was not new. It was just public. Outside, the night air cooled my face. Valets moved with practiced efficiency. A line of black cars idled near the entrance engines, humming doors opening and closing for people who belonged. I stepped aside out of the flow and let the moment pass through me. Inside that ballroom, my father had already resumed his place at the center of his circle. My uncle had found another audience for his jokes. My mother had blended back into the crowd. The room had corrected itself. It always did. They thought that night was the end of me, the final proof of everything they had always believed, that I was nothing, that I would always be nothing, that calling me street garbage in front of 300 people was a statement of fact rather than an act of cruelty. They were wrong. That night was not the end. It was the last chapter of a story that had started 6 years earlier. A story they did not know I had been writing while they were too busy performing their own importance to notice. 2 weeks later, I would sit in a boardroom much smaller than that ballroom. No chandeliers, no champagne, no audience to impress, just a table, a vote, and the sound of my father's world collapsing around him while I said nothing at all. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand what happened in that boardroom, you need to understand everything that came before. That was not the first time I stayed quiet, but it was the first time I understood exactly why I had learned to. Standing in the hallway outside the gala, the memories came back without warning, past the chandeliers and the rehearsed smiles, back into rooms with closed doors and voices lowered just enough to keep me out. I was 23 when the family business began to change. My father had built something modest into something substantial, and substantial was swelling into something that required secrecy and leverage and careful positioning. The language around the house shifted. Words like timing and exposure and strategic patience replaced the old talk of projects and plans. Decisions moved behind closed doors. Meetings happened at the dining table without me, then in the study, then somewhere else entirely. I would hear the hum of conversation from the hallway and know by the rhythm of it that my presence would be inconvenient. No one told me not to come. They simply stopped asking. It was not cruelty. Not exactly. It was efficient. My father believed in momentum, and momentum does not pause to explain itself to someone it does not consider essential. Emails stopped arriving in my inbox. Calendar invitations disappeared. I learned the shape of exclusion not through confrontation, but through omission. When I asked about a meeting, the answer was always the same: adult things, complicated things. Nothing you need to worry about. The phrasing mattered. It did not accuse me of being incapable. It assumed it. And assumptions once set rarely need defending. I remember the first time I pushed back. A proposal had circulated through the family office, one of those aggressive expansion plans that look impressive on paper and brittle up close. I had read the numbers. I had questions that were not dramatic, just practical. At dinner, when the conversation opened, I asked one. My father did not raise his voice. He did not look at me. He finished his sentence and kept going as if I had not spoken. My uncle smiled, then turned my question into a joke about idealism, about youth, about learning how the real world worked. The table laughed softly, relieved to have the tension dissolved. My mother touched my arm afterward and pulled me aside. Her voice was low and careful. Do not make things worse. It was advice offered as protection. That was the lesson. Speaking did not start a conversation. It ended one. I was not punished for asking questions. I was edited out. The cost of speaking up was not anger. It was absent. You lose your place faster by insisting than by waiting. So I waited, and I watched. My family adjusted with remarkable ease. They grew comfortable with my lack of reaction, with talking about me while I sat there, with treating my presence as neutral like a piece of furniture that had always been in the corner. They filled the quiet with their own certainty. It was a habit. When someone does not protest, you stop checking whether they might have a reason to. You stop wondering if they are keeping track. I was keeping track, not of grievances, of patterns. I learned to notice who spoke when things got tense, who deferred, who interrupted, who overruled. I watched decisions repeat until I could predict them. I paid attention to what was said loudly and what was decided quietly. My grandfather was the only one who noticed. He was 81, then still sharp, still attending board meetings, even though his hands shook and his voice had grown thin. One afternoon, a month before he died, he asked me to drive him to a doctor's appointment. Halfway there, he told me to pull over. We sat in the parking lot of a grocery store, engine running, and he said something I have never forgotten. "Your father thinks loud is the same as strong. It is not. The ones who last are the ones who learn when to be still." I did not know what to say. He did not seem to expect me to say anything. A week later, his lawyer called me. My grandfather had amended his will. 8% of the company non-voting shares left directly to me. Not to my father, not to a trust my father controlled, to me. My father contested it. The lawyers told him he would lose. The documentation was airtight. My grandfather had planned it for months. Those shares became my anchor. Not because of the money, because they meant I could not be completely erased. I would receive every quarterly report. I could attend every board meeting. I would always know what was happening, even if no one wanted me there. My father offered to buy the shares 3 times over the next 6 years. Each offer was higher than the last. Each time I said no. The third time he stopped asking politely. He said I was being vindictive, that I was holding on to something I did not understand out of spite. I told him the shares were not for sale. He did not speak to me for 4 months after that. My family mistook my quiet for failure. They measured worth by volume and visibility. They assumed that if I was not pushing, I was not moving. They were wrong. The quiet was not emptiness. It was preparation. It was the space I needed to build something they could not see. And while they spoke over me, while they told themselves a story about who I was and what I lacked, I was learning how to stand still without being erased. Years later, standing in the hallway outside the Gala, that understanding settled into place with a clarity that surprised me. The humiliation had not broken anything. It had confirmed what I already knew. They had been underestimating me for so long that it had become reflex. That underestimation had given me something they never intended to offer: time. And I had used every moment of it. I did not leave in a way anyone could point to later and say that is when she disappeared. There was no announcement, no argument, no dramatic slamming of doors. I just stopped showing up. I moved to Boston 3 weeks after my grandfather's funeral. I had a degree in finance that my family considered decorative and $12,000 in savings that would last 4 months if I was careful. I rented a studio apartment in Somerville with thin walls and a window that looked out on a parking lot. The radiator clanked at night. The elevator smelled like old carpet. It was the first place I had ever lived that no one in my family had chosen for me. The first morning I woke up there, I lay in bed for 20 minutes listening to the sounds of the building, footsteps above me, a door closing somewhere down the hall, the muffled hum of traffic on the street below. No one knew where I was. No one was waiting for me to appear at breakfast. No one was going to ask why I had not shown up to a meeting I was never invited to in the first place. The freedom should have felt exhilarating. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing there was no railing. I applied to 47 jobs in 6 weeks. I heard back from 11. I interviewed at 7. I was rejected by 6. The rejections came in different forms. Some were polite emails that arrived within 24 hours, the speed itself a message. Some were phone calls where the voice on the other end sounded almost apologetic, as if they were doing me a favor by not wasting more of my time. One was a simple silence that stretched into weeks until I understood that no answer was the answer. I learned things about myself during those weeks that I had never had to learn before. How to write a cover letter that did not sound desperate. How to answer questions about my experience without mentioning my family name. How to sit in a waiting room with 6 other candidates and not let them see that I was terrified. The 7th interview was at Pemberton Capital, a fund that managed $400 million focused on real estate and hospitality investments. They were looking for a junior analyst. The pay was $85,000 a year, which sounded like a fortune until I calculated Boston rent and student loans and realized it meant I would be comfortable but not wealthy. I did not care. I wanted the work. The interview was with a woman named Diane Hollister, the head of governance review. She was 58 years old, had been in finance for 30 years, and had a reputation for being impossible to impress. Her office was small and cluttered with files. She did not offer me coffee or water. She did not smile when I walked in. She asked me why I wanted the job. I told her the truth. I said I had spent years watching decisions get made badly. I said I wanted to learn how to recognize the difference between confidence and competence. I said I was tired of rooms where the loudest voice won. She looked at me for a long moment. Her expression did not change. Then she said, "You will fit in fine here." I did not fit in fine. Not at first. The first 6 months were brutal in ways I had not anticipated. I had thought I understood hard work. I had thought I understood pressure. I was wrong. The first mistake came 3 weeks in. A loan agreement for a small retail development in Connecticut. I was assigned to review the covenants, the standard clauses that protect lenders if something goes wrong. I read through them twice. I flagged 2 issues that seemed minor. I submitted my report. The next morning, Diane called me into her office. She had my report on her desk. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "You missed the cross-default provision," she said. "If the borrower defaults on any other loan, this one accelerates too. They have 3 other properties with outstanding debt. Did you check those? I had not checked those. It had not occurred to me to check those." She let me sit with that for a moment. Then she said, "In this job, what you do not find will hurt you more than what you do find. Start over." I started over. I stayed until 11 that night. I found 2 more issues I had missed. The deal still closed, but with modified terms that protected the fund. No one thanked me for the extra work. No one needed to. I had learned something that would stay with me for the rest of my career. The second mistake was worse. 4 months in, I was assigned to prepare a due diligence summary for a potential investment in a hotel property in Philadelphia. The deadline was Friday at noon. The partners were meeting with the seller Monday morning. Everything depended on my report being accurate and complete. I underestimated the scope of the work. I thought I could finish by Thursday night. I was wrong by approximately 18 hours. By Wednesday evening, I realized I was not going to make it. I had 2 choices. I could ask for help and admit I had misjudged the timeline, or I could try to power through alone and hope I could make up the time. I chose wrong. I worked until 3 in the morning Wednesday night, then again Thursday night. By Friday morning, I had slept 6 hours in 2 days, and my eyes burned when I looked at the screen. I submitted the report at 11:45, 15 minutes before the deadline. The report had errors, not major ones, transposed numbers in 2 places, a paragraph that repeated itself, a conclusion that referenced a chart I had forgotten to include. Robert Alcott, the managing partner, called me into his office that afternoon. He was 62 years old with silver hair and the kind of quiet authority that made people lean forward when he spoke. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. He asked me what happened. I told him the truth. I said I had underestimated the work. I said I had been too proud to ask for help. I said I was sorry. He nodded slowly. Then he said something I have never forgotten. Everyone makes mistakes. The question is whether you make the same mistake twice. Do you understand what you did wrong? I said I should have asked for help sooner. He shook his head. You should have known you needed help before you started. Knowing what you do not know is the most important skill in this business. If you cannot learn that, you will not last here. I learned it. The third mistake almost ended my career at Pemberton before it really began. 7 months in, I was copied on an email chain about a client meeting. The client was a regional developer who was considering a new project, a mixed-use building in Rhode Island. My job was to prepare background materials. Nothing complicated. Just a summary of the client's history with the fund and any relevant market data. I prepared the materials. I attached them to an email. I typed the client's name in the recipient field. I did not notice that I had selected the wrong contact. There were 2 people in our system with similar names. One was the client. The other was a competitor who had been involved in a deal that fell through 6 months earlier. I sent confidential client information to the wrong person. I realized my mistake approximately 4 seconds after I hit send. The feeling that went through me was unlike anything I had experienced before. Not fear exactly, something colder, the understanding that I had done something that could not be undone. I went to Diane immediately. I did not try to hide it or fix it myself. I told her exactly what I had done. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone and called the competitor directly. I stood there and listened as she explained the situation. She was calm, professional. She asked him to delete the email without reading the attachments. She thanked him for his discretion. He agreed. Whether he actually deleted it without reading, I will never know. After she hung up, she looked at me. Her expression was unreadable. That was the right thing to do, she said, coming to me immediately. Most people would have tried to cover it up. I did not know what to say. She continued, "You are going to make mistakes. Everyone does. What matters is what you do after. You handled this correctly. Now go back to your desk and do not make me regret keeping you." I went back to my desk. I did not make her regret it. After that, something shifted, not dramatically, not overnight. But gradually the mistakes became less frequent. The work became more familiar. I started to understand not just what to look for, but why it mattered. I learned to read documents the way Diane read them, looking for what was missing rather than what was present. I learned to ask questions that sounded simple but exposed the cracks in an argument. I learned to sit in a room full of people who were smarter and more experienced than me and contribute something they had not thought of. By the end of my first year, I was no longer the person everyone expected to fail. I was simply another analyst doing her job. By the end of my second year, I was promoted to senior associate. The promotion came without ceremony. An email from HR, a modest raise, a new title on my business cards. No one threw a party. No one made a speech. Diane stopped by my desk the day the promotion was announced. She did not congratulate me. She said, "Now the real work starts." She was right. From a distance, my family continued as they always had. I heard about it secondhand through occasional emails from cousins or fragments of news that filtered through mutual acquaintances. I was drifting, they said, taking time, still searching. The words carried a faint note of pity, as if my quiet were a failure that would eventually require intervention. As if moving to Boston and working at a job they had never heard of was evidence of some fundamental inability to succeed. I did not correct them. Correcting would have required engagement, and engagement would have pulled me back into a story that no longer fit. The farther they thought I had fallen, the easier it became to move unseen. I was not falling. I was climbing. Just not on any ladder they knew how to see. 2 years down, 4 more to go. And I was just getting started. It was my third year at Pemberton when I walked into a room and realized no one had decided who I was before I spoke. The room did not look important. That was the first thing I noticed. No chandeliers, no polished surfaces designed to signal inherited wealth. It was a conference space on the 7th floor, neutral walls, a long table scarred by years of use, coffee cups clustered near an outlet like an afterthought. The carpet was worn near the door where hundreds of feet had crossed the same path. The windows faced another office building close enough that you could see people at their desks if you looked. People arrived without ceremony, set down their bags, opened notebooks, started talking before everyone had taken their seats. No one glanced up when I walked in. For the first time in my life, that absence of attention did not feel like dismissal. It felt like neutrality. In this room, no one cared about my last name. No one knew about my grandfather's shares or my father's company or the family dinners where I had learned to stay quiet. I was just another person with a notebook, another voice that might or might not be worth hearing. I took a seat near the end of the table, not because I was hiding, because I did not need the center. The conversation was already moving, voices overlapping slightly as people competed to establish footing. Opinions came fast layered, with confidence, polished phrases delivered like credentials. I listened. Not passively, deliberately. I noted who spoke first, who repeated themselves, who used volume to substitute for clarity, who asked questions that exposed the gaps in what everyone else was assuming. I had spent years learning how to read rooms where I was not welcome. Now I was using those skills in a room where I had every right to be. The discussion circled a familiar pattern, a potential investment in a mixed-use development in Austin. The numbers looked good. The developer had a strong track record. Everyone wanted to move forward. The energy in the room was optimistic, almost eager. Then a practical question cut through the noise, asked without flourish by Diane Hollister, who sounded more tired than impressed. What happens if the anchor tenant pulls out before construction finishes? It hung there unanswered. The kind of question that exposes fault lines if you let it sit long enough. A pause followed. Eyes shifted. Someone cleared their throat. One of the senior associates started to speak, then stopped clearly, unsure of the answer. I spoke then. Not because I needed to be heard, because I had read the lease agreement the night before and noticed something everyone else had missed. The anchor tenant has a termination clause tied to construction delays. If the project runs more than 90 days behind schedule, they can exit with minimal penalty. The developer's last 3 projects averaged 112 days behind schedule. No one clapped. No one smiled. But the room changed in a way I had learned to recognize. Chairs angled slightly toward me. A pen moved. Someone wrote something down. Attention settled. Not loudly, not generously, decisively. The deal did not move forward. 2 weeks of additional analysis confirmed what I had suggested. The risk was too high. The fun passed. After that meeting, people began to address me without announcement. Follow-up questions came. Precise, unadorned. I answered them the same way I had answered the first, cleanly, without claiming space that had not been offered. It mattered that I did not oversell. It mattered that I did not try to impress. In rooms like this, performance reads as insecurity. Competence does not need embellishment. Diane started giving me harder assignments after that, not as a reward, as a test. She would drop files on my desk without explanation. A stack of documents for a potential acquisition, a set of financial statements that did not quite add up, a contract with language that seemed standard but felt wrong. Figure out what is wrong with this, she would say. Then she would walk away. The first few times I spent hours searching for problems that turned out to be obvious once I found them. A liability hidden in a footnote, a lease term that did not match the summary, a projection based on assumptions that had no support. Each time I brought her my findings, she would listen without expression. Then she would ask questions, not to challenge me, but to see if I understood why it mattered, what the consequences would be if we had missed it, who would have been hurt and how badly. She was teaching me to think beyond the immediate problem, to see the whole picture, not just the piece in front of me. One afternoon, about 4 months after the Austin meeting, she asked me to stay after a team review. "You have good instincts," she said. It was the closest thing to a compliment I had ever heard from her. But instincts are not enough. You need to learn how to trust them without becoming arrogant about them. I was not sure how to respond. She continued, "I have seen a lot of people with talent burn out because they started believing their own reputation. They stopped doing the work. They assumed they would see the problems without looking for them. That is when mistakes happen." I nodded. She looked at me for a long moment. "You are not like that. Not yet. Keep it that way." It was the most she had ever said to me in a single conversation. 6 months after the Austin deal, Robert Alcott asked me to stay after a partners meeting. I had been invited to attend as an observer, taking notes and answering questions when asked. It was the first time I had been in a room with all 4 managing partners at once. The meeting had been about portfolio allocation, a discussion I mostly listened to without contributing. But at one point, someone had asked about a property in Denver that was underperforming. Without thinking, I had mentioned that the property management company had changed 6 months ago and that the new company had a history of cost-cutting that affected tenant retention. It was a small observation. I was not even sure anyone had heard it. But after the meeting ended and everyone else filed out, Robert gestured for me to stay. "You caught something everyone else missed," he said. "That is rare." I nodded, unsure what to say. He leaned back in his chair. His office was smaller than I had expected, lined with books and files, rather than the awards and photographs that decorated most executive offices I had seen. "I have been doing this for 35 years, he said. "You know what I have learned." The people who last are not the ones who talk the most. They are the ones who see what others do not want to see. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. That was the moment I understood that the skills I had developed to survive my family were not weaknesses. They were assets. Watching, waiting, noticing what everyone else was too busy to notice. The same qualities that had made me invisible at home had made me valuable here. The contrast with my family's world sharpened quickly. Their status entered the room before the person did. Authority was loud, inherited, reinforced through repetition and performance. Here, preparation mattered. Results mattered. No one cared whose daughter you were or what your last name used to mean. I realized sitting in that cluttered office with the afternoon light fading that I had found something I had not known I was looking for. A place where competence spoke louder than legacy, where you did not have to be born into credibility to earn it. More invitations followed, spaced just far enough apart to test consistency. Another meeting, then another. Deals that were more complex with stakes that were higher. By the end of my 4th year, Diane recommended me for a promotion, lead analyst for governance review. It meant I would be running my own assessments, making recommendations directly to the partners, taking responsibility for decisions that could cost the fund millions if I got them wrong. The title came with a raise and a small office of my own. But what mattered more was what it represented. I was no longer being tested. I was being trusted. When I spoke now, it was expected. When I did not, someone would ask for my view. My absence from a meeting would have been noticed. That was the shift. The rule I had set for myself confirmed its place. I did not need to announce who I was. I did not need to correct assumptions or explain my history. The work would reveal itself in time. And time, I had learned, was a far more powerful ally than explanation. From a distance, my family continued to believe their own story about me. I was drifting. I was lost. I was wasting whatever potential I might have had. They had no idea that I was 4 years into building something they could not see, that every quarter reports with my analysis crossed the desks of their own lawyers and accountants, that the fund they depended on for financing was increasingly depending on me. 2 more years, I thought. 2 more years of learning. 2 more years of watching. Then I would be ready. It was my 5th year at Pemberton when everything shifted. I felt the change before I could name it. Messages that once took days to return started arriving within hours. Calendars that had been immovable began adjusting without explanation. Meetings that used to happen without me started moving subtly to accommodate my availability. No one said anything about it. There were no congratulations, no change in tone, no formal announcement. Expectation had replaced courtesy. That was how I knew something fundamental had changed. I was no longer someone the fund was developing. I was someone the fund was depending on. The promotion to Vice President of Risk came 6 months into my 5th year. It was not a surprise. Diane had been preparing me for it, giving me more responsibility, stepping back from decisions she used to make herself. When the announcement came, she simply nodded at me across the conference table, as if to say, "It is about time." The title meant I was now responsible for final sign-off on every major deal the fund considered. Nothing moved forward without my assessment. Nothing closed without my approval. The weight of that responsibility settled onto my shoulders gradually, like putting on a coat you did not realize was heavy until you tried to take it off. I was 30 years old. I had been at Pemberton for 5 years, and I was now one of the most important people in a fund that managed $400 million. The irony was not lost on me. My family still thought I was drifting. The first real test of my new position came wrapped in noise. A deal was unraveling, not dramatically, but in the quiet way things do when the structure underneath them has not been thought through. Everyone had an opinion delivered with urgency and confidence. Voices overlapped in the conference room. Solutions were proposed and abandoned in the same breath. The room wanted speed. It wanted reassurance. What it did not have was clarity. I sat at the end of the table and listened. I did not volunteer an answer. I did not try to calm the chaos. I waited. Then Robert Alcott turned to me, not as an afterthought, not as one voice among many, as the person whose job it was to see what everyone else had missed. What do you think? It was the first time the question had landed with the full weight of my new title behind it. This was the Hartwell Hospitality deal. $85 million in refinancing for a boutique hotel chain with 4 properties across the Southwest. The paperwork looked clean. The investor presentations were polished. The due diligence had been completed by a junior team who found nothing concerning. Everyone wanted it done. The fees alone would add significantly to our quarterly numbers. But something felt wrong. I could not point to it yet. Just a sense that the confidence in the room was moving faster than the facts supported. I asked for the documents no one wanted to revisit, the original filings, the subsidiary structures, the lease agreements for each property, the litigation history going back 5 years. People looked at me like I was wasting time. The deal was ready to close. Why was I asking for paperwork that had already been reviewed? I did not explain myself. I just asked for the documents. It took me a week to find what everyone else had missed. The CFO of the hotel chain had quietly pledged 2 of the company's properties as collateral for a personal loan. $12 million borrowed against assets that were supposed to secure our investment. It was buried in a subsidiary filing that no one had thought to cross-reference because no one expected to find anything there. The subsidiary had a different name. The filing was in a different state. You had to know to look for it, and no one had known to look. That was not all. The occupancy rates in their investor presentations were calculated using a non-standard methodology that inflated the numbers by 15%. They counted rooms as occupied if they had been booked at any point during the month, even if the booking was later canceled. When I recalculated using industry standards, their flagship property in Scottsdale dropped from 78% occupancy to 63%. That changed everything about their cash flow projections. The property that was supposed to anchor the entire chain was barely breaking even, and there was more. One of their 4 hotels, a converted historic building in Santa Fe, was facing an ADA compliance lawsuit. The building's original architecture made wheelchair accessibility nearly impossible without major structural changes. Estimated remediation costs ranged from $3 to $4 million. The lawsuit had been filed 8 months earlier, not disclosed in any of the materials we had received. I wrote a 40-page report. I documented everything. I included the subsidiary filings, the recalculated occupancy rates, the court documents for the lawsuit. I created a timeline showing how long each issue had been known to the hotel chain's management and when they should have disclosed it to us. I recommended we halt the deal immediately. The partners were not happy. The deal had been announced internally. Relationships with the hotel chain's owners were on the line. Fees had been projected into the quarterly forecast. Bonuses had been calculated based on those projections. One of the senior partners, a man named David Webb, who had brought the deal to Pemberton in the first place, pulled me aside after I presented my findings. His face was tight, with barely controlled anger. "Do you understand what you are doing?" he asked. "Do you understand what this means for the fund? For the relationships I have spent years building, I understood. I also understood what it would mean if I was right and we closed the deal anyway." He leaned closer. His voice dropped. "Are you prepared to be the person who killed an $85 million deal based on paperwork discrepancies?" I looked at him without flinching. "I am prepared to be the person who did her job." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he walked away without another word. Robert Alcott made the final call. We would confront the hotel chain's CFO directly. We would give him a chance to explain the discrepancies before we pulled out of the deal entirely. The meeting happened 3 days later. The CFO flew to Boston with 2 lawyers and a prepared statement about miscommunication and administrative oversights. He could not explain the collateral issue. When I showed him the subsidiary filing with his signature on it, he went pale. His lawyers asked for a recess. They never came back to the table. The CFO resigned within a week. The deal collapsed. The hotel chain's board launched an internal investigation that uncovered additional financial irregularities we had not even found. 3 months later, the Hartwell Hospitality Group filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Every single concern I had raised proved accurate. The properties were worth less than half of their stated value. The cash flow projections had been fiction. If we had closed that deal, the fund would have lost at least $30 million, possibly more. The outcome did not announce itself. There was no dramatic celebration, no champagne, no speeches about the disaster we had avoided. But something changed in the way people looked at me. Robert Alcott stopped by my desk a week after the bankruptcy filing. He did not sit down. He just stood there for a moment, looking at me with an expression that might have been gratitude or might have been something else entirely. "You saved us," he said quietly. "I want you to know that I know that." Then he walked away. David Webb never apologized. He never acknowledged that I had been right, but he stopped challenging my assessments in meetings. That was acknowledgement enough. After that, my name began appearing in conversations I was not part of, not as praise, not as credit, as reference. What Evelyn flagged. Evelyn's concern, if Evelyn is okay with it. My name had become shorthand for credibility, a quiet marker that something had been considered properly. When clients asked about our due diligence process, partners would mention me by name. When other funds called to ask about potential deals, they would ask if I had reviewed the paperwork. I had become essential, not because I was the loudest voice or the most senior person in the room, because I was the one who saw what others missed, because I was willing to be unpopular in the service of being right. 6 years. That was how long it had taken. 6 years of watching, waiting, learning, failing, and getting back up. 6 years of being invisible to my family while becoming indispensable to the people they depended on. From a distance, my family continued to misread my life with impressive consistency. They heard I was consulting, floating, still figuring things out. My uncle made jokes about it at holiday dinners I no longer attended. My father did not mention me at all, which was its own kind of commentary. They spoke as if time were passing me by, as if I were stalled in some extended intermission while the real performers took the stage. The irony was sharp enough to taste. What they did not know was that Pemberton Capital was one of their primary banking partners. Our fund had provided bridge financing for 2 of their developments. Our risk assessments were part of their loan documentation. Every quarter, reports with my analysis crossed the desks of their lawyers and accountants. My name was on those reports. Evelyn Ashford, Vice President of Risk. My father never read them. He had people for that, and those people never mentioned my name to him because it never occurred to them that it mattered. I was invisible to my own family while being essential to the people they depended on. The architecture was shifting beneath everyone's feet, and no one in my family had any idea. 6 years down, the foundation was built. Now it was time to see what could be built on top of it. The meeting happened 3 weeks before the gala, in a room that would never appear in any photograph. No banners, no press, no ceremonial language designed to impress anyone watching. Just a long table, a closed door, and the quiet understanding that what happened there would matter more than anything said on a stage later. I arrived early because I always arrived early. I took a seat along the side of the table, not at the head, not signaling anything. The discussion did not begin with names. It began with risks. Robert Alcott opened a folder and summarized the situation without emotion. The family company, my family's company, had been a client of Pemberton Capital for 7 years. In that time, we had provided bridge financing for 2 developments and participated in 3 refinancing packages. We knew their books better than most outside parties, and what we knew was not good. Someone from our legal team outlined the concerns. Unilateral decisions made without board consultation, loan covenants that had been quietly violated and papered over, relationships with banking partners that had frayed because promises were not kept, investors who had started asking questions about governance. My father's name came up without ceremony. It was framed as a structural problem, style versus scale, impulse versus process. The company had grown too large for one person's instincts to carry it. The decisions that had made my father successful 15 years ago were now the decisions that were creating exposure. The board had lost confidence. The banking partners had lost patience. No one proposed me, not directly. Instead, statements accumulated, small and factual. The daughter has been doing governance work for Pemberton for 6 years. She flagged the issues in the Hartwell hospitality deal before anyone else saw them. She has non-voting shares in the family company. She attends board meetings as an observer. Robert looked at me across the table. He did not ask if I wanted this. He asked if I could do it. I said yes. The room moved on to logistics. Documents were prepared, timelines were set, contingencies were discussed. By the time we stood and the door opened, nothing remained undecided. I did not tell anyone. When the gala invitation arrived weeks later, heavy cardstock and elegant type, I understood immediately why the timing mattered. My father had chosen that night to display his authority. He believed in stages. He believed in moments that could be witnessed. I saw no reason to interfere. Let the night play out. The contrast sharpened in the days that followed. Preparations for the gala unfolded with familiar confidence. I heard about fittings and guest lists and remarks being rehearsed. My uncle reveled in the attention. My father moved through it all with the ease of someone accustomed to being at the center. There were signs if you knew how to read them. A handshake from a board member that did not linger, a glance avoided, a conversation that ended too quickly. None of it registered with him. He was used to being affirmed. He mistook familiarity for loyalty. 2 days before the gala, my mother called me. It was unexpected. She rarely called. When she did, it was usually to relay information about family events, dates, and times delivered without commentary. This call was different. She asked if I was coming to the gala. I said yes. There was a pause. Then she said something that surprised me. "Your father has been difficult lately. More than usual. I do not know what is happening, but something feels wrong." I did not respond. She continued, her voice careful. "I know things have been hard between you and him. I know I have not always been fair to you. But whatever happens, I want you to know that I see more than you think I do." I did not know what to say. I had spent so many years interpreting her silence as agreement with my father, as a complicity, as a choice. But there was something in her voice that sounded different, tired maybe, or resigned. "I just wanted you to know," she said. "That is all." Then she hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after that call. I did not know what it meant. I still do not know entirely. But it changed something in how I thought about her. Not forgiveness, something smaller, an acknowledgement that people contain contradictions, that complicity and awareness can exist in the same person, that silence is not always agreement. The night of the gala arrived. I prepared without preparing anything. No speech, no reveal, no response rehearsed in the mirror. I chose restraint because restraint keeps things clean. The decision had been made. The rest was theater. And theater, I had learned, only matters to the people who believe they control the stage. I arrived knowing exactly what the night was meant to be. Not for me, for him. The venue glowed with deliberate elegance, glass and light arranged to signal permanence, as if wealth could be stabilized through symmetry alone. I dressed the way I always did when I did not want to be remembered. Clean lines, nothing loud, nothing that asked for interpretation. I moved through the entrance without ceremony, handed over my coat, accepted a glass I would not drink. This was not my stage. I had never mistaken it for one. The room was full of people who understood how to belong. They clustered in familiar configurations, greeting one another with practiced warmth, exchanging updates that sounded personal but meant nothing. I felt the usual slide into invisibility as I passed through them. Nods that did not linger, eyes that skimmed and moved on. A few people did not recognize me at all. Others did and chose not to engage. No one asked who I was there with. No one asked why I had come. That indifference laid the groundwork. It made everything that followed easier. My father stood near the center of it all, exactly where he liked to be. A gravitational point dressed in confidence. He moved through the room as if it were an extension of his body, shaking hands, accepting deference, laughing at remarks he had heard 100 times before. He looked comfortable, assured, the way men look when they believe the room exists to confirm them. My uncle trailed nearby, enjoying the reflected attention, inserting himself where possible. My mother stayed close but slightly behind, attentive without being seen. Her role perfected over decades of practice. I thought about our phone call 2 days earlier, the words she had offered without explanation. I wondered if she knew what was coming. I wondered if that call had been her way of preparing both of us. I watched from a distance, not because I was hiding, because observation requires space. The night unfolded predictably. Speeches were anticipated, compliments circulated, Glasses refilled. The illusion of control thickened with every exchange. I knew what was coming, not the words themselves, the impulse behind them. He noticed me mid-conversation. I saw the shift before he spoke, the brief flicker of irritation that crossed his face, the recalibration as he decided what to do with the sight of me. I was an anomaly he had not planned for, a loose thread in a room designed to showcase authority. He did not pause long. Pausing would have required consideration. He chose performance instead. The words landed with precision meant to wound. Street garbage. He said it clearly, loudly enough to be heard by the circle around him and the circle beyond that. The insult carried the weight of history, the kind of phrase sharpened over years of contempt. It was meant to humiliate, to establish hierarchy in front of witnesses. My uncle laughed, the sound too loud, too quick. No skills, no income. He added it like a punchline. A ripple of discomfort moved through the group, a few forced smiles, a cough that sounded like an apology. My mother looked away, her face composed. But I caught something else in her expression, something that looked like grief. For a moment the room did not know what to do with itself. Conversation slowed, then stalled. People sensed the shift the way you feel weather change before the temperature drops. Eyes moved, then avoided. No one intervened. No one challenged him. I did not respond. I did not defend myself or correct him or attempt humor. I did not step back. I stood where I was, still holding the glass, my posture neutral, my expression unreadable. He was used to resistance or retreat. My stillness gave him nothing to push against. Security approached with professional efficiency. Summoned by a gesture I had not seen but felt ripple outward, the request was delivered politely, as if to soften the fact of what was happening. I nodded before they finished speaking. I set the glass down, smoothed the fabric of my dress. Thanks to the host for the evening. The words were ordinary, almost absurdly so, but they mattered. As I turned to leave, I took in the last details without sentiment. My father had already shifted his attention. The moment expanded. The display is complete. My uncle was still smiling. My mother remained still. But her eyes followed me to the door, and in them I saw something I had never seen before. No pity. Recognition. The doors closed behind me. The lighting was less flattering, but more honest. I did not rush. There was no urgency in my steps. The night had delivered exactly what it was meant to deliver, just not to the person who thought he controlled it. Inside that ballroom, they believed they had erased me. They did not know that the decision had already been made, 3 weeks earlier, in a room much smaller than this one. With documents already signed and timelines already set, 2 weeks later the vote would happen, and everything would change. 2 weeks passed after the gala without incident. I did not follow the coverage. I did not replay the night in my head. I returned to routine, to the measured pace that had carried me this far. I answered messages, reviewed materials, showed up where I was expected to show up. Nothing in my demeanor changed because nothing needed to. The decision had already been made. The calendar was just catching up. The boardroom was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, smaller than the ballroom, intentionally so. No windows facing the street, no audience to perform for. The table could seat 12. Today it seats 9, 7 board members. My father, me. I arrived 30 minutes early. I wanted to be seated before anyone else walked in. I wanted to choose my position deliberately. I took a chair along the side, not at the head, not signaling anything. The first board member arrived at 10 minutes before the hour, then another, then 3 more in quick succession. They greeted me with nods, professional, neutral. No one mentioned the gala, no one offered condolences or asked how I was doing. That was how I knew they were serious about what was coming. My father entered last, as he always did. He walked in with the confidence of someone who had never lost a vote in his life. He shook hands, made eye contact, smiled at familiar faces. Then he saw me. He stopped walking for half a second, just long enough for me to notice. "What is she doing here?" His voice was controlled, but I could hear the edge underneath it. The board chair, a man named William Porter, who had known my father for 20 years, answered without looking up from his papers. "She has observer rights. She holds 8% of the company." My father's jaw tightened. That is non-voting. It is still owned, William said. She stays. My father took his seat at the head of the table. He did not look at me again. The meeting began with reports, dry and methodical. Quarterly financials, project updates, banking relationships. Then the agenda moved to governance. William read from a prepared statement. His voice was flat, careful, stripped of anything that could be mistaken for emotion. Concerns had been raised. Patterns had emerged. Decisions made without consultation. Loan covenants violated without disclosure. Partners who had lost confidence. Investors who had begun to ask questions. My father interrupted 3 times in the first 5 minutes. He spoke of loyalty. He spoke of history. He spoke of everything he had built. William let him finish. Then he continued reading as if my father had not spoken. When the floor turned to me, it was not with ceremony. I was asked to confirm details, to clarify timelines, to answer questions that required accuracy rather than persuasion. The hotel deal, William said. You flagged issues that no one else caught. Walk us through what you found. I did, calmly, without embellishment. The collateral issue, the inflated occupancy rates, the undisclosed lawsuit, the CFO's resignation, the bankruptcy filing 3 months later. I laid out the facts the way I had been trained to lay them out, each one building on the last, each one impossible to dismiss. When I finished, the room was quiet. My father stared at me from across the table. His expression had shifted from confidence to something I had never seen before, uncertainty. You did this, he said. His voice was low, almost a whisper. I did my job, I said. He shook his head. You have been planning this whole time, waiting for your moment. I met his eyes without flinching. I have been doing my job, I repeated, the same job I have been doing for 6 years. The fact that you never noticed is not my fault. The vote came without preamble. William asked each board member in turn, 7 votes, all in favor of removing the current leadership, all in favor of an interim appointment. My father did not vote. There did. He was not asked to. The declaration was brief. Effective immediately, leadership of the company would transition. My name was read into the record. Vice President of Risk at Pemberton Capital, 8% shareholder, interim CEO pending full board review. For a long moment, no one moved. My father sat very still, his hands flat on the table. His face was drained of color. This is a betrayal, he said finally. His voice cracked on the last word. William shook his head. This is governance. The meeting adjourned. People gathered their things, filed out in the same quiet order they had arrived. I stayed seated. My father did not leave. We sat there across from each other as the room emptied. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything that had never been said. Finally he spoke. You could have told me. He did not look at me when he said it. You could have warned me. I considered the question. I considered all the years of being talked over, edited out, dismissed. Would you have listened? He did not answer. I stood. I gathered my papers. I walked toward the door. When I reached it, I stopped. I did not turn around. I am not doing this to hurt you, I said. I am doing this because it needs to be done, and because no one else was going to do it. Then I walked out. Behind me, I heard nothing. No response, no argument, just silence. And for once, the silence was mine. The meeting ended without punctuation. Chairs slid back, folders closed. People stood with the efficient politeness reserved for outcomes no one plans to debate. There was no applause, no release of tension, no collective acknowledgement of what had just happened. Authority had moved, and the room accepted it the way it accepts gravity. I gathered my papers slowly. Not because I needed time, because haste felt unnecessary. A few people stayed behind, not hovering, not eager. They approached when the room had thinned, when proximity could not be mistaken for performance. William Porter was the first. He shook my hand with both of his. His grip was firm but not aggressive. Your grandfather would have been proud, he said. I nodded. It was the only response I could manage. Diane Hollister had come from Pemberton for the vote. She waited until William moved away, then stood beside me without speaking. After a moment, she said quietly, You handled that well. I learned from the best, I said. She almost smiled. Almost. Then the messages began. Phones that had once stayed silent lit up with sudden warmth. People who had ignored emails for months wanted to catch up. Names that had blurred in my memory reappeared with invitations framed as overdue. I read them without resentment. Some people do not stand with a person. They stand near a position. I answered selectively, courteously, without urgency. One conversation cut through the noise because it did not orbit the outcome at all. Robert Alcott found me in the lobby after everyone else had left. He was holding 2 cups of coffee. "Figured you might need this," he said. We sat in a quiet corner of the building cafe. The lunch crowd had cleared. The afternoon light came through the windows at a low angle. He did not mention the vote. He did not talk about strategy or next steps. Instead, he told me a story about his father. How his father had built a small manufacturing company in Ohio. How his father had refused to let him work there after college had made him earn his way somewhere else first. How his father had died before Robert ever got to prove that he had learned the lesson. I did not know why he was telling me this. Then I did. "The hardest part is not winning," he said. "The hardest part is deciding what kind of winner you want to be." I held my coffee cup without drinking from it. "I am not trying to win," I said. He nodded. "I know. That is why you did." Family was harder. My father did not call. He did not text. The absence felt deliberate, not stunned. My uncle, I heard, was telling a different story, one where betrayal had replaced accountability, where my name appeared only as a device. That was predictable. He had always needed an audience. My mother surprised me. She called 2 days after the vote. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I saw the news," she said. I did not respond. "I am not calling to argue," she continued. "I am not calling to take sides. I just wanted to say that I understand why you did it, even if I do not know how to feel about it yet." I held the phone against my ear for a long moment. "Thank you," I said finally. There was a pause. Then she said something I had never expected to hear. "You were always the one who saw things clearly." I should have told you that a long time ago. I did not know how to answer. The words I could have offered were too complicated for a phone call. "Maybe we can talk," I said. "When you are ready." "Maybe," she said. Then she hung up. I did not chase acknowledgement from my father. I did not ask for explanations or wait for reconciliation. I had spent too many years explaining myself to people who had already decided who I was. There is a particular freedom in realizing you do not need permission to move on. It is not loud. It is not vindictive. It is quiet and irreversible. The loneliness arrived later, not as grief. As for clarity, for the first time, there was no one above me to absorb the consequences of a decision, no one to defer to when outcomes were uncertain. The responsibility was total, and it did not come with reassurance. Leadership, I learned, does not comfort you. It confronts you with your own judgment and asks whether you trust it. A door closed without ceremony. Another opened the same way. The work continued because it always does. Power did not change who stood with me. It revealed who never did. The first morning after everything changed felt almost ordinary. I arrived early, before the building filled with noise. Let myself into the office that had been my father's for 15 years. No announcement waited for me. No staff gathered. The space was the same one I had walked past for years, familiar down to the scuff on the door frame and the hum of the lights. The desk was cleared. The personal items had been removed. What remained was furniture and function. I sat at the desk and opened the agenda I had written the night before. It was not ambitious. No sweeping reforms, no symbolic gestures meant to signal a new era. Just decisions that had been delayed for too long because they were inconvenient to the wrong people. The kind of work that rarely earns applause, but determines whether an institution can survive itself. I began there because that was where the damage had accumulated. I did not take back money or property or attention. Those things had never interested me. What I reclaimed was simpler and harder to quantify. The right to decide without asking permission. The right to speak without being measured for tone. The right to set standards and expect them to be met. Those had been taken from me long before the gala, chipped away by a system that confused authority with volume. I took them back without raising my voice. The first changes were small enough that some people did not notice them at all. A policy that punished caution was withdrawn. A reporting line that his accountability was rerouted. A process that required approval from too many people was simplified until it made sense again. No one was blamed. No past decisions were dragged into the light for judgment. I said this changes today and moved on. Clarity is more persuasive than justification. I paid particular attention to the people who had been silent when silence was safer than dissent. They worried me more than the ones who had openly aligned themselves with the old order. I did not punish them, and I did not reward them. I watched. Loyalty, I decided, would be built forward, not backward. I was not interested in debts. I was interested in patterns. Facing my father's legacy was unavoidable. It lived in contracts, in structures designed for speed rather than resilience, in habits that privileged decisiveness over care. I reviewed everything with the same discipline I had applied to work at Pemberton. I kept what held. I corrected what bent. I removed what threatened collapse. I did not erase him. I corrected what he broke. That distinction mattered to me, even if it would never matter to him. There were moments when I paused over a decision and felt the pull of a different impulse. It would have been easy to reverse something simply because he had instituted it. Easy to humiliate the way I had been humiliated. I resisted that temptation. Not out of mercy, out of intention. Power used to settle scores corrodes quickly. I had seen that corrosion up close. Instead, I did something he had never done. I listened. Not performatively, not to signal approachability, because information lives in places authority often ignores. I opened doors that had been closed for convenience. I asked questions that had been labeled disruptive. I let people speak who had been trained not to. The shift was subtle at first, then unmistakable. Conversations changed. Meetings took longer. Decisions improved. Word traveled without my help. People noticed that interruptions were fewer, that dissent was not punished, that preparation mattered more than proximity. The culture did not transform overnight, but it tilted. Once it tilted, it began to move on its own. That was the most satisfying part, not because it proved anything about me, but because it meant the institution could outlast me. That had always been the point. I realized then that power no longer felt like a weapon in my hands. It felt like a tool, one that required care and maintenance and restraint. It did not demand proof of existence. It did not need enemies to define itself. I had not taken power to hurt him. I had taken it to stop the cycle, to make sure the room never again rewarded cruelty as leadership. Late one afternoon, when the building had emptied and the noise had receded, I stayed behind alone. Just the quiet hum of a system adjusting to a new equilibrium. I thought about the years I had spent watching, about the patience it had required, about the cost. I had not taken everything back in a single moment. I had taken it back in pieces. My voice, my judgment, my choices. Those were the things that mattered. Sitting there, I understood that the hardest part was not reclaiming what had been taken. The hardest part would be deciding what to do with it now that it was mine. The first time I understood that revenge was no longer a fantasy, but a practical option, it arrived quietly. No surge of adrenaline, no cinematic clarity, just a line item buried in a report, a procedural choice presented without commentary. I could authorize an audit that would reopen decisions long settled. I could release information that would reframe the past publicly and permanently. I could allow certain processes to proceed faster than others, knowing exactly who they would expose. Every option was legal. Every option would be justified. For the first time, no one could stop me. The realization carried weight because it stripped revenge of its drama. This was not about what I had imagined doing when I felt powerless. This was about what I could do now that I was not. The possibilities assembled themselves without effort. I could make him small the way he had tried to make me small. I could ensure that every contribution he had ever claimed was footnoted with the damage it caused. I could rewrite the story so thoroughly that there would be no space left for his version to survive. I could do it without raising my voice, without ever appearing vindictive. Institutions have a way of burying people politely. What mattered was that no one asked me to. No ally hinted. No process demanded it. There was no pressure to settle scores. This was a choice offered in full daylight without coercion. And that made it more dangerous than any impulse born of anger. I found myself thinking of my father before the gala, before authority hardened into cruelty. I remembered a man who believed in structure, who spoke about responsibility as something you carried for others rather than wielded over them. He had not always needed to humiliate to lead. Somewhere along the way, power replaced judgment. He stopped measuring outcomes and started measuring dominance. I did not excuse him for that. Memory is not forgiveness, but it complicated the narrative I could have used to justify destruction. The question formed slowly and refused to be ignored. If I did to him what he had done to me, if I used authority to satisfy a personal wound, what would I become? Would the difference between us be anything more than timing? Power does not test what you can do. It tests what you are willing to become when no one is forcing your hand. I had spent years refusing to let others define me. I was not about to surrender that control to a moment of satisfaction. Robert Alcott had said something to me once, months before any of this happened. We were reviewing a deal that had gone wrong, talking about a partner who had made a costly mistake. Everyone wants to punish failure, he said. The hard part is knowing when punishment serves the work and when it just serves you. I had filed that away without fully understanding it. Now I did. I decided not to act. Decided not to. Not in the dramatic sense. I did not announce restraint or frame it as virtue. I did not reach out to reconcile or demand acknowledgement. Mercy, I learned, is not reconciliation. Mercy is restraint. It is the decision not to convert authority into a weapon simply because you can. I left certain files untouched. I declined to make statements that would have invited spectacle. I let history remain complicated rather than rewriting it into a morality play with a clear villain and a redeemed hero. The consequence of that choice was not relief. It was not a moral elevation. It was quieter than that. I slept without rehearsing arguments I would never have to make. I did not scan rooms for reactions or wait for apologies that would never arrive. I felt no need to defend my decision because it did not require defense. I had not spared him to win. I had spared myself from becoming someone I would not recognize. There were moments when doubt surfaced, when the old instinct whispered that I had let something go that I deserved. I acknowledged the thought and let it pass. Deserved is a dangerous word. It invites entitlement, and entitlement corrodes judgment. I had not won by sparing him. I had won by not losing myself. That was the moment I knew the truth of it. I was not becoming powerful. I already was. The proof was not in what I did, but in what I chose not to do when every system around me would have allowed it. Power had given me a mirror, and I had not flinched. The morning began without significance, which was how I knew everything had finally changed. Light filtered through the windows of my office the way it always had, pale, indifferent, touching the edges of the desk, the chair, the city beyond the glass. No photographers waited outside. No urgent calls pressed against the edges of the day. I made coffee myself, reviewed the schedule without marking anything in red, and stood for a moment watching traffic collect and release at the intersection below. The world moved at its usual pace, unconcerned with what had shifted inside me. That steadiness told me more than any announcement ever could not. Because everything had stopped, but because it had not, and I no longer needed it to revolve around me to feel real. I thought about the woman I used to be with a clarity that held no cruelty. Evelyn years ago, standing just behind the line of attention, measuring every room before deciding how much of herself it was safe to reveal. She learned stillness, as protection learned to shrink her presence so the air would not harden into resistance. She survived by anticipating moods, by reading faces, by knowing when silence would cost less than speech. For a long time she believed value arrived through permission, that worth was granted by louder voices, by people who had decided they belonged long before she entered the room. I do not judge her for that. She survived the only way she knew how. Survival is not weakness, it is adaptation under pressure, and it deserves respect. What changed was not the moment power came into my hands. That was only a visible marker, a point others could circle when they told the story later. The real change happened earlier in places no one bothered to watch, when I stopped asking to be included and started deciding where I belonged. When I realized authority did not give me a voice so much as reveal that I had one, even when no one was listening. I no longer asked permission to exist. I no longer mistook stillness for love or compliance for safety. I stopped making myself smaller so others could feel larger beside me, and the absence of that effort freed more energy than I ever realized I had been spending. My relationship with my family settled into something unremarkable, and for that reason sustainable. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no public reckoning, no final argument designed to tidy the past into something comprehensible. My father and I did not speak. The absence was not hostile. It was complete the silence of two people who had exhausted the language they once used to wound each other. My uncle faded into irrelevance with surprising speed. Without my father's authority to amplify him, his voice carried less weight, and eventually he stopped attending meetings altogether. No one remarked on his absence. Power has a way of revealing how little noise ever mattered once the source is removed. My mother called once a month. The conversations were careful but not cold. We spoke about weather, about health, about things that could be held without reopening everything else. Once she asked how I was sleeping. Another time she mentioned a book she thought I might like. We did not discuss the gala or the vote or the years that led us there. It was not closed. It was maintenance. And for now that was enough. Distance chosen and maintained can be an act of care. Peace, I learned, does not require closeness. It requires clarity. In the rooms where decisions were made now, I was seen differently. Not celebrated, not feared, trusted. People did not look to me for performance or reassurance. They looked for consistency, for judgment that held under pressure and did not change shape when challenged. Leadership at its most durable does not argue for legitimacy. It demonstrates it through repetition, through decisions that remain sound after the noise has passed. I no longer felt the need to prove myself to every voice that entered the conversation. Proof accumulates quietly when you stop interrupting it with explanation. There was a moment small enough to miss that told me more than any outcome ever could. A junior analyst spoke up during a meeting, tentative, but prepared, offering an observation that might once have been dismissed for its tone alone. The room paused, not to evaluate the speaker, but to consider the idea. Questions followed, not to undermine, but to understand. I watched the shift register across the table and felt something settle into place. I remembered myself at that age holding thoughts back because the cost of being wrong felt unbearable. This is the work now, not winning, not reacting, building rooms where people did not have to disappear to survive. Later that afternoon, an email arrived from an address I had not seen in years. A former colleague from my earliest days, someone who had left the industry quietly and without ceremony. The message was brief. "I saw your name in the announcement," it said. "I'm glad you're there. You always noticed the things that mattered." I stared at the screen longer than necessary before closing it. Some recognitions arrived too late to change anything, but still managed to confirm what you already know. On my way home that evening, the car passed the hotel where the gala had been held. The lights were dimmer now, the entrance unremarkable. The building returned to its ordinary shape. I did not ask the driver to slow down. I did not look away either. It was just a place, stripped of the meaning it once carried. The memory of standing there, absorbing words meant to erase me, no longer had edges sharp enough to cut. I was not that woman anymore. Not the stillness mistaken for emptiness. Not the role assigned by people who needed me small to feel secure. I carried those versions of myself with honesty, not shame, because they built the resilience I stand on now. But they no longer defined me. That night, I stayed late in the office, not because the work demanded it, but because I wanted the quiet. The building thinned out, the lights dimmed, and the city beyond the glass softened into a pattern of movement without urgency. I reviewed a proposal from a team that had been overlooked for years, not because it was flawed, but because no one had taken the time to read it closely. The idea was solid. The risk was manageable. I approved the next step and sent a short note asking thoughtful questions, the kind that signal engagement rather than dismissal. It was a small action barely visible, but it mattered. Change often announces itself that way. I understood then what revenge had never been able to offer me. Revenge keeps you tethered to the people who hurt you. It centers them even in your victory. Freedom arrives when you stop needing their approval, their acknowledgement, their regret. Living without that need is the quietest and most complete form of reclamation. I did not become powerful to be seen. I became powerful so I would never disappear again.